Hey everyone, welcome back to the Life and Language podcast channel. I'm Ben. I've been on my feet all day today, so honestly, getting home and kicking off my shoes felt amazing, which got me thinking about today's topic. Because here's something I find genuinely fascinating. Walk into some homes around the world and you'll notice a little row of shoes lined up neatly by the front door. Nobody inside is wearing footwear. But in other places, maybe where you grew up, wearing shoes inside is completely normal. No one thinks twice about it. So why does this difference exist? What does it actually say about a culture's values and the way people think about their living spaces? That's what we're digging into today. But first, a quiz question. And I want you to actually think about this one. Which country is generally considered to have the most deeply embedded shoe removal culture? Meaning it's practically universal across the whole society, practiced in almost every home? Is it A, Finland, B, Japan, or C, India? So, is it A, B, or C? Go ahead and think about it. Personally, my gut says B, Japan, because I've heard so much about how strict it is there. But I could be wrong. We'll come back to the answer later in the episode. Alright, so let's get into it. The practice of removing shoes before entering a home goes back thousands of years, and it shows up across a huge range of cultures in East Asia, South Asia, Scandinavia, the Middle East, and more. But the reasons behind the habit are really interesting because they vary quite a bit depending on where you are. The most practical reason is hygiene. Hygiene means cleanliness, specifically keeping yourself and your environment free from dirt or disease. Think about what your shoes actually walk through during a single day. Pavements, public transport floors, public bathrooms, puddles. Research has found that the soles of shoes can carry hundreds of different types of bacteria, including some that are genuinely harmful. So, from a pure hygiene standpoint, removing shoes makes a lot of sense. But in many cultures, it goes beyond just keeping the floor clean. There's also a strong sense of boundary. A boundary, in this context, is an invisible line between two different spaces. In this case, between the outside world and the home. Removing your shoes at the door is a physical ritual that marks the moment you cross from public life into private, protected space. You're leaving the outside world and everything it carries behind. In Japan, this idea is especially powerful. The entrance area of a Japanese home is called the genkan, which is a small lowered step right at the front door, where shoes are removed and stored. The floor inside is raised, which literally and symbolically separates the outside from the inside. The concept here connects to a broader cultural value of purity, keeping the inner space of the home clean and separate from external contamination. And contamination here means more than just physical dirt. It includes the idea of spiritual or symbolic uncleanliness. In many South Asian and Middle Eastern cultures, the same logic applies, but often with a stronger religious dimension. In Islamic tradition, cleanliness is considered part of faith and prayer spaces, and often homes are kept shoe-free for that reason. Similarly, in Hindu tradition, shoes are seen as impure because they've been in contact with the ground outside, and removing them before entering a home or temple is a mark of respect. I asked a few people what they think about this habit. Here's what they told me. I grew up in South Korea and we always took off our shoes at the door. It was just automatic. My friends who visited from Europe thought it was strange at first. But by the end of the day, they were doing it too, without even thinking. Honestly, in my house growing up in the United States, no one ever took their shoes off. We walked straight in and it was totally fine. Now I live with a Japanese flatmate and I've completely changed. I actually prefer it this way. In my family from Morocco, removing shoes is about respect for the space, for the people living there. It's not really about dirt. It's about saying, this place is special. So what about the cultures that don't remove shoes indoors? And why is there sometimes tension when these habits clash? Well, part of the answer is that in places like much of Western Europe and North America, the floor was historically treated as a work surface rather than a living surface. Something you stood and worked on, not something you sat or lay on. In many Western home layouts, people sit on chairs and sofas, so the floor itself isn't actually touched very often. Compare that to cultures where people traditionally sit on floor cushions, eat at low tables, or sleep on floor-level mats. In those environments, a clean floor is absolutely essential, not optional. This gets into what anthropologists, scientists who study human cultures and behavior, call implicit norms. Implicit means something that isn't directly stated, but is understood by everyone in the group. No one tells you to remove your shoes, you just know. These implicit norms are incredibly powerful because they shape behavior so deeply that people often don't even realize. They have them until they encounter someone who does things differently. That clash of norms is actually a really common source of awkwardness when people travel or move between cultures. A guest from a shoe-wearing culture walks into a shoe-free home without noticing the row of shoes at the door, and suddenly everyone feels uncomfortable. The host might not want to say anything because they don't want to seem rude, and the guest has no idea they've done anything wrong. This is what researchers call a social script failure, when two people are following completely different, unspoken rule books for the same situation. And here's the twist, even within cultures, the norm is shifting. As people move between countries, share homes with people from different backgrounds, and read more about hygiene science, shoe-free homes are becoming more common in places that never practiced it before. It's one of those quiet, slow-moving cultural changes that happens without anyone officially deciding it. Before we wrap up, let's quickly go through today's words. Hygiene, keeping yourself and your environment clean and free from disease. For example, good hygiene in the kitchen means washing your hands before you cook. Boundary, an invisible line or limit between two different spaces or states. For example, removing your shoes marks a boundary between the outside world and your home. Contamination, the process of something becoming dirty or unsafe through contact with harmful substances. For example, contamination from outside bacteria was the reason they introduced a strict shoe policy. Implicit understood or felt without being directly stated. For example, there was an implicit agreement that no one would wear shoes past the front door. Social script, the unspoken set of rules that guides how people behave in a given situation. For example, when he kept his coat on at dinner, it felt like a social script failure. Nobody knew quite what to do. Okay, the quiz answer. The question was, which country has the most universally embedded shoe removal culture? I guessed B, Japan, and I'm happy to say I was right. Japan is widely considered to have the most consistent and deeply embedded shoe removal practice, where it applies to homes, many restaurants, some offices, schools, temples, and traditional ryokan inns. It's not just a preference. It's genuinely a core part of how domestic and social space is organized. The big takeaway today? The shoes on or shoes off habit isn't really about shoes at all. It's a window into how a culture draws the line between public and private, between the outside world and the sanctuary of home. If you want to keep practicing, comment "practice," and I'll reply with today's phrase. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you in the next episode.